This is not just a tale, it's a true story, shared with me by my best friend. He's a guy who lived through something no one should ever face. Tonight, I'm telling you his story, exactly as he told me. I'm a bachelor in my mid-30s. A few years back, I went through one of the darkest phases of my life. My long-term relationship of 5 years had just ended with the woman I believed would one day be my wife, the mother of my future children. To put it mildly, I was completely adrift. The emotional toll was intense. For weeks, I drifted through life like a shadow, ignoring my own needs, neglecting hygiene, and sinking into silence. Mornings began with wordless routines. Days at work were speechless, and nights ended in isolation under the covers. Weekends were lonelier, meals forgotten, curtains drawn, and endless films playing in the background like white noise. I wasn't even aware of what I was watching, just numbing myself. But enough with this sorrowful reflection. Life's changed a lot since then. I've healed in many ways, though the ghost of what could have been still lingers in my thoughts. Anyway, this all began one Saturday night. I was sprawled across my bed's couch, barely shifting, except to tap play on yet another forgettable film. I couldn't even recall its name. Just another empty, explosive action movie that would vanish from memory the moment credits rolled. For a little context, my bedroom is on the upper floor, second level of the house, and it's got its own TV and sofa, so I rarely go elsewhere to watch anything. At some point, I glanced at my phone. The clock showed a few minutes past 9 p.m. I clearly remember that time because it was my mom's 4th attempt to call me that day. I didn't want to dismiss her intentionally. She just cared, but I let the call go unanswered. I wasn't ready to face the usual questions. Did you eat something? Have you gone outside today? After a while, the film playing became too dull, even for my numb mind. I exited back to the home screen, not really in the mood for anything, and randomly picked a horror flick I'd never seen or even heard of before. It had that typical low-quality, fuzzy-looking thumbnail, like the kind you skip past without a second glance. I thought I'd just let it play in the background until sleep took over. Roughly 20 minutes in, I realized it was far worse than expected. The audio mix was a complete disaster. Whenever a character spoke, I had to crank the volume way up just to catch a few muffled words. And then suddenly, some loud effect would explode through the speakers like a sonic grenade, nearly blowing out my ears. Still, for reasons even I couldn't explain, I kept it running. Probably because I didn't feel like browsing for something else again. Then I noticed a strange recurring sound. It was this harsh metallic clang, almost like a steel bar striking cement. But the odd part? It didn't align with anything on screen. No one was handling metal, there were no industrial scenes, and it wasn't synced with any of the supposed jump scares. It would just repeat every 60 seconds or so. Same tone, identical intensity, exact repetition. It honestly felt like someone had accidentally looped a random noise in the soundtrack. The weird part was how obviously out of place it was, especially since the rest of the film's audio was a mess. It made me wonder how something this broken had even been allowed on a streaming platform. In a strange way, the awfulness kept me watching. Part of me was amused by how bad it was, and another part needed to see how this disaster would eventually unravel. I was about halfway through by then. I got up to head to the bathroom, and for some bizarre reason, I actually paused the movie, a moment of clarity in a sea of indifference. When I came back, I sat down and picked up the remote, hovering my finger over the play button. But right before I hit it, that same sharp metallic clang echoed through the silence. This time, the movie was still paused. I froze, staring at the frozen screen. No audio, no movement, just the clear, unmistakable sound. That's when it hit me. It had never been part of the movie. I stayed perfectly still, trying to convince myself that I hadn't imagined it. I just stared at the paused screen and listened, hoping it was just some odd trick of my mind. But then, about 45 seconds later, there was again the same piercing clang. Without thinking, I jumped up, grabbed a knife from my desk, and began rushing through each room, checking every corner, every possible hiding spot. Every room was empty. No one was there. No signs of intrusion. Everything seemed in place. But as I walked back up the stairs, my heart was still hammering in my chest. I heard the clang again. This time it was quieter, meaning it had to be coming from my room, where I'd been sitting. But that didn't make sense. I hadn't left the spot the whole time. That's when it hit me. A few windows were cracked open. It was spring, and the weather was finally warming up, so I'd gotten into the habit of letting some fresh air in during the evenings. Maybe the sound wasn't from inside at all. Maybe it had been coming from right outside. For reasons I couldn't explain, that thought chilled me even more. I moved towards the window, gently pushing the curtain aside just enough to peek into the backyard. And there it was, a deck chair, sitting alone in the middle of the lawn, maybe 20 feet from the house. And standing next to it was a child. I couldn't make out any facial features. It was too dark outside, but the silhouette was unmistakably small. It was definitely a kid. He was holding something that looked like a PVC pipe. That must have been the source of the clang I'd been hearing. He must have seen me, because the moment I looked out, he slammed the pipe against the chair. I instantly recoiled from the window, a wave of fear crashing over me. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the fear of what I'd just seen. Why was that kid standing outside my house? Did he have some kind of disorder? The situation just didn't add up. Then I realized something even more unsettling. He must have been out there for almost an hour. That thought made my skin crawl. I tried to calm myself, slow my breathing, and think logically. Maybe the kid was lost. Perhaps he had wandered away from a nearby house and couldn't find his way back. I convinced myself that I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I had to help. So I went downstairs, making my way through the house toward the back door, keeping my nerves in check. I even turned on the porch light, hoping it would make the kid feel less afraid, or at least give me a better view of him. But as I reached for the door handle, I froze. Something felt wrong. It was like I was walking into a trap. If that kid really was lost, wouldn't he have rung the doorbell or called out through my window? And even if he was too scared to speak, why would he keep hitting the chair with that pipe for a whole hour? It made no sense. Everything in my gut screamed at me to stay inside. I slowly took a step back from the door, my heart racing. I crept over to a small window just beside it, one that gave me a clear view of the porch and part of the backyard. I kept the room dark, not wanting to give away my position, and with trembling fingers, I carefully tilted the blind just enough to peer through. And there they were, two men, dressed entirely in black, crouching beneath my back door, waiting to strike the moment I opened it. I must have been staring too long because one of the men suddenly jerked his head toward me, locking eyes through the glass. I panicked, quickly dropped the blinds, and dialed 911. Halfway up the stairs, I heard the unmistakable sound of banging on the back door. They were trying to break in. I bolted to my bathroom, locking the door behind me, heart pounding. At that point, I was in full-blown panic mode. I felt paralyzed, unable to move, struggling to catch my breath. Just after I locked the bathroom door, I heard a crash downstairs followed by footsteps echoing beneath me. They were inside my house. The footsteps climbed the stairs, and my breath hitched as they drew closer. I watched in horror as the bathroom doorknob twisted ever so slightly. Then came the sound of a loud bang. They were trying to force the door open. That was the breaking point. I screamed as loud as I could, telling them the police were on their way. Immediately, the footsteps retreated, and I heard them sprinting back down the stairs. I heard one of the doors slam shut, and then there was silence. The police arrived shortly after, and I told them everything I could. But there wasn't much they could do. I didn't have any cameras, and I couldn't give them any solid details. The only thing that made them take it a bit more seriously was the mention of a child. According to the officers, that kind of involvement meant whoever these men were, they weren't acting on impulse. They were willing to go much further. That realization scared me to my core. I still can't stop thinking about that poor kid and what role he played in all of it. Every possible explanation I came up with felt sickening. The police suggested I was probably the target of a random attack, but to me, the whole thing seemed too calculated, too elaborate to be a mere coincidence. Nothing's happened since then, and I've moved on with my life. But what haunts me the most is wondering whether that kid is okay, though I know the chances of that are slim. It's 2024 now, and as I'm writing this, I'm getting ready to graduate in a couple of weeks. Let me take a moment for a quick rant. I never understood how most of my friends could survive an entire week-long spring break trip to places like Miami or other party spots. For me, spring break was always an excuse to escape college chaos and just relax at home. This past spring break was no different. I had planned to disconnect from everything for a week, focusing on some much-needed rest from all the intense schoolwork and unnecessary drama. What really pissed me off, though, was my scummy TA denying my regrade request for a midterm I had worked so hard on. Anyway, it was a Monday morning, and I didn't have much on the agenda. Just needed to squeeze in a workout, and that was about it. I've always been a morning workout person. It's the one thing that helps me feel like I'm on top of life. So, even though I was technically on break, I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and dragged myself out of bed. I figured if I went early enough, I could avoid the gym crowd. By 6:20, I was dressed, out the door, and on the road. The gym was about 15 minutes away, mainly through quiet residential streets. Nothing much ever happened out there. It was a peaceful place to grow up, but as I got older, it started feeling a little dull, especially after all my childhood friends moved on with their lives. I was driving listening to some YouTube beats when something odd caught my attention. An ice cream truck was parked on the side of the road, just sitting there with its engine off and no lights on. If it had been summer, maybe it wouldn't have been as strange, but this was mid-March, and it was still a little chilly outside. Besides, all the kids were at school, so there was no real reason for an ice cream truck to be parked there at 6:30 a.m. It just seemed completely out of place. As I passed by, I slowed down to glance through the driver's side window, but it was empty. By the time I turned the corner and drove away, the thought of it was sticking in my mind more than it should have. I couldn't pinpoint exactly why, but something about it felt off. It wasn't just that it was too early in the year for an ice cream truck to be there. I realized I'd never even seen one in my neighborhood growing up, not once. It just wasn't the kind of place for that. Though it was strange, I tried to push it out of my mind and went on with my workout. Afterward, I grabbed a quick bite and headed home, feeling good about my morning. But when I turned onto the same street later, I saw the ice cream truck again, still parked in the exact same spot. That made me stop and think. I figured someone must have reported it by now, especially in a neighborhood where people are quick to complain if you park for too long in front of their house. Actually, it reminded me of a time when a cranky woman yelled at my friends and me for parking in front of her house, even though we were just waiting for a friend who lived next door. I'm not crazy for thinking someone should have called the cops about the truck. Curiosity eventually got the best of me. Instead of heading home right away, I decided to drive around the block and pass the truck again to see if anyone was inside. Sure enough, there was someone. As I drove by the second time, I must have been way too obvious, driving slowly while looking at the truck because the guy sitting in the front seat stared right at me. He looked off. His nose was long and almost cartoonishly pointed, and his scraggly beard looked like it hadn't been shaved in ages. He gave off the vibe of someone who lived in their vehicle, and honestly, it gave me the chills. I drove straight home after that. With both my parents at work, the house was quiet, and I spent the next few hours just passing the time. Later in the afternoon, I went down the driveway to check the mail. As I reached the end of the driveway, I glanced down the street and froze. There it was, the same ice cream truck. It was parked across the street, 3 houses down, and it wasn't facing me, but I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Had that guy really followed me home? There was no other explanation. I grabbed the mail and quickly went back inside, trying to act like I hadn't noticed anything. I went upstairs and into one of the guest bedrooms, which has a window that offers a better view of the street. I pulled the curtain back slightly and peered outside. Sure enough, the ice cream truck was still parked there. I watched it for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Eventually, though, I had to pull myself away. I couldn't spend all day staring out the window. I tried to focus on some work on my laptop, but it was impossible. Every half hour or so, I felt the irresistible urge to go back to the guest room and check on the truck. Every time I looked, it was still there, but it had moved to a different spot, which meant the driver was deliberately circling the street for some reason. I couldn't decide whether I should call the police. Nothing had really happened yet, so I wasn't sure what I'd even say. Now, looking back, I wish I'd either done what anyone else would do, call the police, or just ignored the whole thing. But my curiosity got the better of me. My older brother's really into birdwatching, so I started looking through his room for his binoculars. After a bit of searching, I found them and went back to the guest room. I pulled the curtains back again, this time using the binoculars to get a closer look at the truck. What I saw through the driver's side window, though, was something I definitely wasn't prepared for. I wasn't even sure what I'd tell them since nothing had actually happened. Even now, I wish I had just done what any normal person would do, either called the police or ignored the truck, but my curiosity got the better of me. My older brother is really into bird watching, so I started digging around his room for his binoculars. After a while, I found them and went back to the guest room. I pulled the curtains aside again and looked at the truck through the binoculars. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see through the driver's side window. I could see the man from before, but this time, he wasn't just sitting there. He was staring directly at me, holding his own binoculars. The moment he noticed I was looking back, he quickly dropped them, started the truck, and drove away. I was in shock. This guy had been watching me and my house for nearly 3 hours, literally following me home. That's when I decided to call the police. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I expected to happen, but I had no other choice. I told them about the ice cream truck circling my neighborhood all day. about the man inside watching my house through binoculars and how he drove off the second I caught him. The dispatcher remained calm and assured me they'd send someone to patrol the area and keep an eye out. She said it wouldn't be hard to spot an ice cream truck because they're so distinctive, and then she ended the call. I didn't know what to do next. When my parents got home later, I filled them in on everything. They were concerned but reassured me that it probably wasn't worth stressing over anymore. I was exhausted by then, so I managed to fall asleep quickly. Sometime later, I woke up unexpectedly in the middle of the night. I instinctively grabbed my phone from the nightstand. It was just after 3 a.m. I lay there in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me when I heard it. Music. It was faint at first, almost too quiet to notice. As I listened closely, panic began to build inside me as I realized what kind of music it was. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could react, something tapped softly against the glass of my bedroom window. It clicked in my mind someone was throwing rocks at my window. That must have been what woke me up. The music was too quiet to be heard clearly on its own. I sat there frozen, staring at the wall across from me. I kept telling myself to get up, to look, but every time I tried to move, my body locked up. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to act. I crept toward the window and paused for a moment to gather my thoughts. On the count of 3, I yanked back the curtain in one swift motion. The sight I saw made my heart drop. The man from earlier was standing in the middle of my front yard, right below my window. On either side of him, holding his hands, were 2 small figures. They looked like children, or at least that's what I assumed, based on their short stature. But with the darkness, I couldn't be sure. I didn't waste any time. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I pushed through it. I quickly stepped away from the window and rushed to wake up my dad. I had already dialed 911 by the time he went downstairs to check. My dad's a pretty tough guy, so I knew he'd handle it. I figured my dad would want to handle the situation on his own, but unfortunately, the man had somehow managed to slip away in the few minutes it took for us to get outside. The police arrived later on, but after a few days, we still hadn't heard anything. I had to head back to school, but my parents promised to stay extra vigilant. That was nearly a month ago, and thankfully, my parents haven't mentioned anything strange happening since. However, the reason I'm writing this now is because my mom called me a few days ago with some unsettling news. Apparently, there was a missing persons case that had just been made public in our town. A pair of 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had disappeared from a neighborhood about 30 minutes away. As soon as she said it, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 small figures standing next to the man in my front yard. The thought of it makes me sick. Why would that man spend hours spying on my house and throwing rocks at my windows in the dead of night? And why go to such extreme lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Maybe he was worried that I'd figured something out, but if he really had taken those kids, why would he risk drawing attention to himself? And then there are the kids themselves. I keep wondering if the kids were already with him when I first spotted the truck that morning, or if they were somewhere else. I can't shake the thought. The only conclusion I've come to is that the kind of person who would kidnap children doesn't think like most people, which is why that man would risk being caught just to mess with me. My mom followed up with the police to try to provide some clarity on the case and any possible connection to it. If anything new happens, I'll be sure to send an update. This all took place last spring, about 9 months ago. It sounds like your job keeps you on your toes. Being a sales associate at BMW must involve a lot of juggling between calls, clients, and the dealership's daily tasks. It makes sense that you'd answer even the unknown numbers because you never know when a potential client might reach out. Plus, the scam calls can definitely be annoying, but it's a smart move to stay vigilant for any real opportunities. Do you have any strategies for dealing with the constant stream of calls? That's genuinely unsettling. The fact that it was your own voice coming through the phone, especially with such clarity, must have been eerie. It's one thing to have a recording of your voice, but hearing it from a recent conversation like that raises so many questions. It's almost like someone had access to your phone or had been listening in without you knowing. Do you think it was a prank, or could it have been something more concerning, like someone hacking into your phone? If it were me, I'd probably start looking into any unusual apps or permissions on my phone, and maybe even change up my security settings. Have you had any strange activity on your phone, or heard of anything similar happening to others in your area? That must have been so weird, calling the client and hearing him sound completely normal and confused. It almost feels like that moment should have put your mind at ease, but the fact that his response didn't match the strange situation you experienced would definitely leave you with more questions. The combination of it being an unknown number and your voice being played back without any apparent reason still makes it feel like something was off. At this point, I'd be thinking about any potential security vulnerabilities, like whether your phone was hacked, or if there's a chance someone had access to your calls in real time. Maybe it's worth doing a deep dive into your phone's security settings, or even running a malware scan if you haven't already. That's something that could help rule out any possibility of someone intercepting your calls or recordings. Do you think you'll bring this up with anyone else, like coworkers or people who might have more insight into weird tech stuff, or just let it go for now? That's seriously disturbing. The fact that it kept happening every single night must have left you feeling like you were being watched, especially since the recording didn't even have the client's voice, just yours. It's like someone's pulling your conversations from thin air. It would be hard not to start wondering if you were being spied on, whether through your phone or another way. I can see why you'd start to feel paranoid, and honestly, I don't think it's an overreaction. This sounds like something that could involve someone hacking into your phone or using some kind of surveillance tool. The static could be a clue, almost like the person is using some sort of software that's making these recordings. At this point, have you looked into doing a security check on your phone? Something like checking your app permissions, updating your software, or maybe even using a security app to scan for malware might be worth trying out. Have you told anyone else about this? It might also help to get advice from a tech-savvy friend or someone who might know more about phone security. If it's happening every night, it's clearly more than just a coincidence. That sounds incredibly overwhelming. It's like the mental strain was starting to bleed into every part of your life. Something as simple as relaxing or getting a good night's sleep became impossible. Triple locking doors and leaving lights on might sound like extreme measures, but I can understand why you did it. When you're constantly on edge and feel like you're being watched or followed, it starts to feel like you can't trust anything around you. Moving the chair in front of your bedroom door, though, that's a sign that your mind was really starting to spiral. It's not easy to snap out of that kind of paranoia, especially when something feels so out of your control. The fact that you started recording the calls too shows how much it started to affect your sense of reality. It's like you were trying to gather proof or control the situation somehow, but it sounds like you were also trapped in this cycle of fear. Did you ever confront the calls directly with your phone provider, or perhaps even a professional? If it kept happening every night, it might have been a good idea to look into some kind of phone tracing or investigation to see if there's someone out there hacking into your communications or using some kind of surveillance method. It's such a bizarre situation, and I can only imagine how exhausting it must have been to go through. How did things progress from there? That must have been a mix of relief and dread when the call stopped. It's like you finally got a break, but at the same time, it's almost worse when the silence makes you question whether it was real or just your mind playing tricks. It's understandable that you'd feel more paranoid after the call stopped. When you've been in that heightened state for so long, the absence of something that's been so intrusive can make you feel like you're waiting for the next thing to happen. I get why you'd feel isolated. 2. When the police don't take you seriously, it feels like you're left alone with something that's not even fully explained. It makes it harder to figure out what to do next, especially when you can't shake that feeling that something might still be off. But I'm glad the call stopped. Even though it might feel unresolved, at least you didn't have to keep dealing with that daily stress. Did you ever get any more clarity on whether the calls were being made by someone you knew, or did you just have to leave it as a mystery? That must have been such a tough decision, especially with the risk of it being more than just someone messing with you. The idea of being watched or followed can feel incredibly isolating, and it's understandable that you'd think you needed to take drastic steps to stop it. The fact that you went as far as offering money shows how overwhelmed and desperate you must have felt by that point. Changing your number sounds like a big step, but at the same time, it makes sense, especially if you thought your old number was compromised. Still, the fear that it might not have ended after that, and that the calls came back with even more persistence must have been a terrifying feeling. Offering to meet, though, trying to confront whatever it was head-on, was a pretty brave move, even if it came from a place of desperation. I can only imagine how unsettling it must have been when that call came in again after the silence. What happened when you offered to meet them? Did the person on the other end respond? That whole situation sounds like it was truly terrifying, especially with everything that had built up until that moment. The voice on the other end of the phone, distorted and cryptic, must have sent a chill down your spine. I can understand why you felt the need to take extreme precautions, like grabbing your handgun and preparing for whatever could happen. It's also completely understandable that in such an emotionally charged and stressful situation, you acted on impulse. When you're pushed to your limits by something as unnerving and unpredictable as this, it's hard to think clearly. I can imagine the mix of emotions you were going through: fear, confusion, maybe even a sense of powerlessness. Sitting there waiting for something to happen and not knowing if you were about to face something life-changing must have felt like an eternity. The fact that nothing happened when 11 o'clock came and went, though, probably left you feeling a combination of relief and further confusion. What did that silence mean? Were they toying with you, or was it just an empty threat? Even now, I'm sure that uncertainty still eats at you. Do you feel like there's any closure to this, or are you still haunted by the possibility that it might return at any time? I can't imagine the weight of everything you went through, having to grapple with the terror and confusion during that time, and then carrying the emotional aftermath. It's incredibly heavy. I'm glad to hear that therapy helped you work through it, but I completely understand why the experience would leave lasting scars. The not knowing who the person was, why they did it, and how they were able to do it is the kind of unresolved mystery that can linger in your mind for a long time. The fear of ending up like your mom, compounded by this event, must feel like an extra burden. Mental health struggles can sometimes seem like an inevitable fate, especially after something as unsettling as what you experienced. But the fact that you're reflecting and writing about it is a big step in the healing process, as hard as it might be. This kind of writing can be therapeutic, and I hope it provides a sense of release and clarity for you. It's also perfectly natural to feel the lingering unease, especially after such an invasive experience. I hope that, with time, you can find more peace and regain a sense of control over your environment, knowing that you made it through the worst of it. If you ever feel like you need to talk more about this or anything else, I'm here.